We hear a lot of the term activist, or saying that we want to bring our kids up right with values. Or we may say we want to instill good morals or values again. Or we may talk about the term character. The word too, doing what is right, teaching children right and wrong, also comes to my mind. Surely we want to help people grow, be kinder to people. We want to believe that we're of help to people, and even leave a better mark on the universe than when we came in. But I wonder, is it possible that we can talk so much about values in terms of physical violence, stealing, even, quote, killing, or enslavement of using others, so to speak, expediently, short-term expediently, and yet miss the mark on this one thing. And that one thing is that it seems to me all too easy for us to do all of the above, or try to give attention to all of that, but miss the mark when it comes to emotional violence, emotional manipulation, emotional acts that are short-term expedient. And what do I mean by that? I mean precisely this, as I see it today, or these days, that it's all too often the case I've seen for so-and-so to be an activist or a helper or have a cause. And yet, the very people we may want to help or be helping in one area, whether it's giving this or that, or giving advice even, our views, can be said in a way that is emotionally violent, emotionally put-downing, so to speak, emotionally clubbing people over the head with our words, essentially. And how can that happen? Well, this seems then a major flaw in mankind, that our words are often very, very inappropriate. I think there was a philosopher, was it Wittgenstein, or else Alan Watts, who had said, our words are very clumsy. But what does that mean then, clumsy? Does it particularly mean that they're simply vague? Or is there something more involved? It strikes me that one of the biggest problems in our words is that when we're talking about objects like trees, airplanes, rocks, weather, we attribute that these objects have no capacity to choose anything. And so whatever happens to us in connection with these objects, in contact with these objects, we don't consider them to have malicious intent. And yet when it comes to people, this all too often doesn't seem to be the case. We want to flip around people as somehow exempt from the laws of cause and effect. This is something pointed out magnificently, I believe, around 1960 by a psychologist, Dr. David Schwartz, in his book and audiobook entitled The Magic of Big Thinking. He was a university professor in Georgia, but also did counseling. And amongst other things in his audiobook, he said a key point is that we need to look at people as not exempt from the laws of cause and effect, basically. And I thought that was quite profound as I reflected on it. Unfortunately, I think almost all our words, if not all of them, when talking about people, convey that we have the capacity to pull a rabbit out of a hat, and that in essence we are exempt from the laws of causality. And so then begins the big problem, I believe, that mankind has not yet corrected in terms of rewriting one's dictionary, one's lexicon, so that we see people in a compassionate and non-blameful, non-angry fashion, because we take into account totally that we are just as subject to the laws of cause and effect as a rock, a tree, etc. If only then we could modify, probably gradually, but maybe even in one fell swoop, with a huge dictionary issued to everybody and studied in schools, that looked at it from this viewpoint, people from this viewpoint. What a magnificent change we might have. For the Buddhists, for instance, all too often urge us not to think, rather than use words that would be inappropriate. Inappropriate in terms of clumsy, some might say, but blameful, hateful. A misinterpretation of our capacities as human beings to supposedly escape the laws of cause and effect. I'm reminded, too, of Leo Gura, another philosopher on YouTube today, actualize.org. He's received in recent days or years a lot of criticism from some, but I think he has many brilliant ideas, and for a long time one of his phrases really threw me upside the head, and it was, "Don't pigeonhole people." I thought about that for years, and I concluded not too long ago that this probably has more than a smidgen of truth to it, in that two things. First, he's probably inclined to tell us not to use existing words to categorize people if they're blameful, hateful words, and knowing in the back of his mind or more that the only words really that we could use that are not so are words we invent ourselves, neologisms, if you will, or terms thus that maybe a teenager would use but then not in adulthood, like square or dweeb, or other concoctions that by the time they reach 20, 25 get chucked out the window as childish or non-understandable. In fact, there's the rub, that the neologisms, the words we create, tend not to be understood by anybody except ourselves and those we instruct as to the meaning. And of course, then we could spend our whole lives trying to define every word we're using that we've created, rather like the criticism some mathematicians may get, that they've invented whole new symbologies and no one else understands. They call it arcane or something unintelligible or even gibberish. Hieroglyphics. So if we invent our own words, maybe they will be called hieroglyphics, hieroglyphic words. And yet, what are the alternatives? Well, the Buddhists might say, or Ram Dass for that matter, one thought leader of years past, that we should say nothing at all, and thus not say anything harmful. Dr. Levy, too, has said words to the effect in a great video, I wish I could remember the title right now, that we can harm people considerably with our words, and so we should be careful. There are others who have said the same thing also. From a variety of disciplines, including Christianity, of course. And within Christian scriptures, it is often said, do not judge lest you be judged. And of course, then that can be taken by way too many people as an admonition not to size people up, not to use terminology, thus to determine prime characteristics of someone so that this can be more easily remembered by far than feelings, impressions, if you will. But therein, again, perhaps the rub being that if we, quote, judge, if we assess and then label with a term that is going to be hateful, blameful, that essentially denies cause and effect laws of the universe when we're talking about people, well, then I'm not surprised that these terms would be considered taboo. And yet to use no terms then can be to be really in a rabbit hole, in my opinion, because then you can't size people up, essentially, other than a feeling. And feelings are very ephemeral and short-lived, surely, and can't be compared and contrasted. That's what symbology is for in mathematics, but it doesn't seem to extend when we're talking about people. Not in the positive sense, anyway. So often, in my opinion, the people best at winnowing others, so to speak. The Bible might say between good and evil, but I would prefer not to use the word evil. The people doing the best at winnowing or sorting through, comparing and contrasting and applying terms to those people they see are often going to be, if not almost inevitably, the most saddled with anger, hatred even, blame. If you doubt that, watch a news show or a talk show in general. For they will, of course, want to talk about certain people and other people and compare and contrast, and I doubt very much they're using what I call neologisms to do so, or else they would constantly be describing and defining those terms, and we would get nowhere efficiency-wise, time-wise. Even the cognitive therapists, so to speak, cognitive behavioral therapy, Dr. David Burns, maybe Aaron Beck, and others, have urged people not to label people. But surely, as my thinking has come these days, a label should only be called a label if it is a term that is conveying hate, blame. And of course, I believe in my view that almost all our words are of this manner when it comes to people. But not, again, objects. For do we really have much of a problem labeling anything inanimate, so to speak? Like if you're an interior decorator, knowing at least 50 shades rather than just 2 or 3. Do we have much of a problem with labeling the parts on an engine of a car or the essentials of a house? And yet when it comes to people, we want to turn around and call such things labels and say labels are inappropriate to use. But without labels, how are we supposed to discern the essentials of a person to know what's in our best interest when in contact with them or wanting to help them or whatever? It seems we have a long way to go then. And we need a total revision of our vocabulary set. And that in print and talking about in schools, if we're going to make the next advance in mankind. Those are my thoughts anyway, stimulated in part by my father having been an English professor and retired now from that himself, and is having invested considerably in my training in English when I was in high school. That being one part then of my life, along with having a lot of relatives who were from Eastern Europe or Germany, both actually, and almost none of them having had a, quote, formal education beyond the 6th grade level. And spending a lot of time myself in nature too, and growing up considerably on farms in small towns, but also in large metro areas, having been born in Detroit, for instance, and lived for a time 3-4 years in San Diego. Those are my thoughts then on this whole idea of wanting to raise people up, quote, morally, caringly, and helping people in this regard, but without the proper terms, call them words, even labels sometimes, I think we're really going to suffer.